Hey, welcome back. I want to give a huge shout out to Ghostman76015 on YouTube, who dropped a comment on, I think it was Princess of Mars, which that was a while ago, so it's so cool to see people digging in the backlist of the podcast there on YouTube. They said, my fave book of all time. Love these stories. So very, always exciting to get comments and feedback from people. So huge shout out to Ghostman76015 there on YouTube. If you want to drop a comment, you can do that on Spotify, also on YouTube. Go subscribe there. I would love to get us up to that 1,000 subscriber mark. We're getting closer, definitely getting closer. And once we cross that, that is going to just really help the podcast and help me to be able to continue to bring more awesome stuff to you. So go check that out. Just go to anotherworldaudiobooks.com. The link to the podcast is the link to YouTube is right there as well as the link to Patreon if you want to become a patron and support the podcast and stop having chapters chopped up into pieces. I hate doing that. Would love your support there. Thank you to Sharon and Ariella for your support of the podcast. This means the world to me. I'm so grateful for that. Thank you guys for listening, and let's get right into it. Without further ado, I give you part 2 of chapter 5 of Arsene Lupin versus Herlock Sholmes. Monsieur Destange was already in the library. They had been working only a few minutes when Clotilde entered, bade her father good morning, entered the adjoining parlour, and sat down to write. From his place, Sholmes could see her leaning over the table, and from time to time absorbed in deep meditation. After a short time, he picked up a book, and said to Monsieur Destange, "Here is a book that Mademoiselle Destange asked me to bring her when I found it." He went into the little parlour, stood before Clotilde in such a manner that her father could not see her, and said, "I am Monsieur Stigman, your father's new secretary."
"Ah," said Clotilde without moving. "My father has changed his secretary? I didn't know it."
"Yes, mademoiselle, and I desire to speak with you."
"Kindly take a seat, monsieur. I have finished."
She added a few words to her letter, signed it, enclosed it in an envelope, sealed it, pushed her writing material away, rang the telephone, got in communication with her dressmaker, asked the latter to hasten the completion of a travelling dress, as she required it at once, and then, turning to Sholmes, she said,
"I am at your service, monsieur. But do you wish to speak before my father? Would not that be better?"
"No, mademoiselle, and I beg you, do not raise your voice. It is better that Monsieur Destange should not hear us."
"For whose sake is it better?"
"Yours, mademoiselle."
"I cannot agree to hold any conversation with you that my father may not hear."
"But you must agree to this. It is imperative." Both of them arose, eye to eye. She said,
"Speak, monsieur."
Still standing, he commenced, "You will be so good as to pardon me if I am mistaken on certain points of secondary importance. I will guarantee, however, the general accuracy of my statements."
"Can we not dispense with these preliminaries, monsieur, or are they necessary?"
Sholmes felt the young woman was on her guard, so he replied, "Very well, I will come to the point. 5 years ago, your father made the acquaintance of a certain young man called Maxime Bermond, who was introduced as a contractor or an architect. I am not sure which it was, but it was one or the other. Monsieur Destange took a liking to the young man, and as the state of his health compelled him to retire from active business, he entrusted to Monsieur Bermond the execution of certain orders he had received from some of his old customers, and which seemed to come within the scope of Monsieur Bermond's ability." Herlock Sholmes stopped. It seemed to him that the girl's pallor had increased, yet there was not the slightest tremor in her voice when she said,
"I know nothing about the circumstances to which you refer, monsieur, and I do not see in what way they can interest me."
"In this way, mademoiselle. You know as well as I that Maxime Bermond is also known by the name of Arsene Lupin." She laughed and said,
"Nonsense! Arsene Lupin? Maxime Bermond is Arsene Lupin? Oh no, it isn't possible."
"I have the honor to inform you of that fact, and since you refuse to understand my meaning, I will add that Arsene Lupin has found in this house a friend, more than a friend, an accomplice, blindly and passionately devoted to him." Without emotion, or at least with so little emotion that Sholmes was astonished at her self-control, she declared,
"I do not understand your object, monsieur, and I do not care to, but I command you to say no more and leave this house."
"I have no intention of forcing my presence on you," replied Sholmes with equal sang-froid. "But I shall not leave this house alone."
"And who will accompany you, monsieur?"
"You will."
"I?"
"Yes, mademoiselle. We will leave this house together, and you will follow me without one word of protest." The strange feature of the foregoing interview was the absolute coolness of the two adversaries. It bore no resemblance to an implacable duel between two powerful wills, but judging solely from their attitude and the tone of their voices, an onlooker would have supposed their conversation to be nothing more serious than a courteous argument over some impersonal subject. Clotilde resumed her seat, without deigning to reply to the last remark of Herlock Sholmes, except by a shrug of her shoulders. Sholmes looked at his watch and said, "It is 10:30. We will leave here in 5 minutes."
"Perhaps."
"If not, I shall go to Monsieur Destange and tell him—"
"What?"
"The truth. I will tell him of the vicious life of Maxime Bermond, and I will tell him of the double life of his accomplice."
"Of his accomplice?"
"Yes, the woman known as the Blonde Lady. Of the woman who was blonde."
"What proofs will you give him?"
"I will take him to the Rue Chagrin, and show him the secret passage made by Arsene Lupin's workmen, while doing the work of which he had the control, between the houses numbered 40 and 42, the passage which you and he used 2 nights ago."
"Well?"
"I will then take Monsieur Destange to the house of Monsieur Detinan, and we will descend the servants' stairway, which was used by you and Arsene Lupin when you escaped from Ganimard, and we will search together the means of communication with the adjoining house, which fronts on the Boulevard des Batignolles, and not upon the Rue Clapeyron."
"Well?"
"I will take Monsieur Destange to the Château de Crezon, and it will be easy for him, who knows the nature of the work performed by Arsene Lupin in the restoration of the chateau, to discover the secret passages constructed there by his workmen. It will thus be established that those passages allowed the blonde lady to make a nocturnal visit to the Countess's room and take the blue diamond from the mantel, and 2 weeks later, by similar means, to enter the room of Herr Bleichen and conceal the blue diamond in his tooth powder. A strange action, I confess. A woman's revenge, perhaps. But I don't know, and I don't care."
"Well?"
"After that," said Herlock Sholmes in a more serious tone, "I will take Monsieur Destange to 134 Avenue Henri Martin, and we will learn how the Baron d'Hautrec—"
"No, no, keep quiet,"
stammered the girl, struck with a sudden terror.
"I forbid you. You dare to say that it was I. You accuse me?"
"I accuse you of having killed the Baron d'Hautrec."
"No, no, it is a lie."
"You killed the Baron d'Hautrec, mademoiselle. You entered his service under the name of Antoinette Brillat for the purpose of stealing the blue diamond, and you killed him."
"Keep quiet, monsieur,"
she implored him.
"Since you know so much, you must know that I did not murder the Baron."
"I did not say that you murdered him, mademoiselle. Baron d'Hautrec was subject to fits of insanity that only Sister Auguste could control. She told me so herself. In her absence, he must have attacked you, and in the course of the struggle, you struck him in order to save your own life. Frightened at your awful situation, you rang the bell, and fled without even taking the blue diamond from the finger of your victim. A few minutes later, you returned with one of Arsene Lupin's accomplices, who was a servant in the adjoining house. You placed the Baron on the bed, you put the room in order, but you were afraid to take the blue diamond. Now, I have told you what happened on that night. I repeat, you did not murder the Baron, and yet it was your hand that struck the blow." She had crossed them over her forehead, those long, delicate white hands, and kept them thus for a long time. At last, loosening her fingers, she said, in a voice rent by anguish,
"And do you intend to tell all that to my father?"
"Yes, and I will tell him that I have secured as witnesses Mademoiselle Gerbois, who will recognize the blonde lady, Sister Auguste, who will recognize Antoinette Brillat, and the Countess de Crezon, who will recognize Madame de Réal." That is what I shall tell him."
You will not dare,
she said, recovering her self-possession in the face of an immediate peril. He arose and made a step toward the library. Clotilde stopped him.
One moment, monsieur.
She paused, reflected a moment, and then, perfect mistress of herself, said,
You are Herlock Sholmes.
"Yes."
What do you want of me?
"What do I want? I am fighting a duel with Arsene Lupin, and I must win. The contest is now drawing to a climax, and I have an idea that a hostage, as precious as you, will give me an important advantage over my adversary. Therefore, you will follow me, mademoiselle. I will entrust you to one of my friends. As soon as the duel is ended, you will be set at liberty."
Is that all?
"That is all. I do not belong to the police service of this country, and consequently I do not consider that I am under any obligation to cause your arrest." She appeared to have come to a decision, yet she required a momentary respite. She closed her eyes, the better to concentrate her thoughts. Sholmes looked at her in surprise. She was now so tranquil, and apparently indifferent to the dangers which threatened her. Sholmes thought, "Does she believe that she is in danger? Probably not, since Lupin protects her. She has confidence in him. She believes that Lupin is omnipotent and infallible." "Mademoiselle," he said, "I told you that we would leave here in 5 minutes. That time has almost expired."
Will you permit me to go to my room, monsieur, to get some necessary articles?
"Certainly, mademoiselle, and I will wait for you in the Rue Montchanin. Genu, the concierge, is a friend of mine."
Ah, you know?
she said, visibly alarmed. "I know many things."
Very well. I will ring for the maid.
The maid brought her hat and jacket. Then Sholmes said, "You must give Monsieur Destange some reason for our departure, and if possible, let your excuse serve for an absence of several days."
That shall not be necessary. I shall be back very soon.
They exchanged defiant glances and an ironic smile. "What faith you have in him," said Sholmes.
Absolute.
"He does everything well, doesn't he? He succeeds in everything he undertakes, and whatever he does receives your approval and cooperation."
I love him,
she said, with a touch of passion in her voice. "And you think that he will save you?" She shrugged her shoulders, and approaching her father, she said,
I am going to deprive you of Monsieur Stickman. We are going to the National Library. Will you return for luncheon? Perhaps. No, I think not. But don't be uneasy.
Then she said to Sholmes in a firm voice,
I am at your service, monsieur.
"Absolutely."
Quite so.
"I warn you that if you attempt to escape, I shall call the police and have you arrested. Do not forget that the blonde lady is on parole."
I give you my word of honor that I shall not attempt to escape.
"I believe you. Now, let us go." They left the house together, as he had predicted. The automobile was standing where Sholmes had left it. As they approached it, Sholmes could hear the rumbling of the motor. He opened the door, asked Clotilde to enter, and took a seat beside her. The machine started at once, gained the exterior boulevards, the Avenue Hoche and the Avenue de la Grande Armée. Sholmes was considering his plans. He thought, "Ganimard is at home. I will leave the girl in his care. Shall I tell him who she is? No, he would take her to prison at once, and that would spoil everything. When I am alone, I can consult my list of addresses taken from the account MB and run them down. Tonight, or tomorrow morning at the latest, I shall go to Ganimard as I agreed, and deliver into his hands Arsene Lupin and all his band." He rubbed his hand gleefully at the thought that his duel with Lupin was drawing to a close, and that he could not see any serious obstacles in the way of his success. And yielding to an irrepressible desire to give vent to his feelings, an unusual desire on his part, he exclaimed, "Excuse me, mademoiselle, if I am unable to conceal my satisfaction and delight. The battle has been a difficult one, and my success is, therefore, more enjoyable."
A legitimate success, monsieur, of which you have a just right to be proud.
"Thank you, But where are we going? The chauffeur must have misunderstood my directions. At that moment, they were leaving Paris by the Gate de Nuit. That was strange, as the Rue Pergolese was not outside the fortifications. Sholmes lowered the glass and said, "Chauffeur, you have made a mistake. Rue Pergolese." The man made no reply. Sholmes repeated in a louder voice, "I told you to go to the Rue Pergolese." Still, the man did not reply. "But you are deaf, my friend. Or is he doing it on purpose? We are very much out of our way. Rue Pergolese! Turn back at once! Rue Pergolese!" The chauffeur made no sign of having heard the order. The Englishman fretted with impatience. He looked at Clotilde. A mysterious smile played upon her lips. "Why do you laugh?" he said. "It is an awkward mistake, but it won't help you."
"Of course not,"
she replied. Then an idea occurred to him. He rose and made a careful scrutiny of the chauffeur. His shoulders were not so broad. His bearing was not so stiff and mechanical. A cold perspiration covered his forehead, and his hands clenched with sudden fear, as his mind was seized with the conviction that the chauffeur was Arsene Lupin. "Well, Monsieur Sholmes, what do you think of our little ride?" "Delightful, monsieur. Really delightful," replied Sholmes. Never in his life had he experienced so much difficulty in uttering a few simple words without a tremor or without betraying his feelings in his voice. But quickly, by a sort of reaction, a flood of hatred and rage burst its bounds, overcame his self-control, and brusquely drawing his revolver, he pointed it at Mademoiselle Destange. "Lupin, stop this minute, this second, or I fire at Mademoiselle." "I advise you to aim at the cheek if you wish to hit the temple," replied Lupin, without turning his head.
"Maxime, don't go so fast," said Clotilde. "The pavement is slippery, and I am very timid."
She was smiling. Her eyes were fixed on the pavement, over which the carriage was travelling at enormous speed. "Let him stop! Let him stop!" said Sholmes to her, wild with rage. "I warn you that I am desperate!" The barrel of the revolver brushed the waving locks of her hair. She replied calmly,
"Maxime is so imprudent. He is going so fast. I am really afraid of some accident."
Sholmes returned the weapon to his pocket and seized the handle of the door, as if to alight, despite the absurdity of such an act. Clotilde said to him,
"Be careful, monsieur. There is an automobile behind us."
He leaned over. There was an automobile close behind, a large machine of formidable aspect, with its sharp prow and blood-red body, and holding 4 men clad in fur coats. "Ah, I am well guarded," thought Sholmes. "I may as well be patient." He folded his arms across his chest with that proud air of submission so frequently assumed by heroes when fate has turned against them, and while they crossed the river Seine and rushed through Cérennes, Rouet, and Château, motionless and resigned, controlling his actions and his passions, he tried to explain to his own satisfaction by what miracle Arsene Lupin had substituted himself for the chauffeur. It was quite improbable that the honest-looking fellow he had selected on the boulevard that morning was an accomplice placed there in advance, and yet Arsene Lupin had received a warning in some way, and it must have been after he, Sholmes, had approached Clotilde in the house, because no one could have suspected his project prior to that time. Since then, Sholmes had not allowed Clotilde out of his sight. Then an idea struck him. The telephone communication designed by Clotilde and her conversation with the dressmaker. Now it was all quite clear to him. Even before he had spoken to her, simply upon his request to speak to her as the new secretary of Monsieur Destange, she had scented the danger, surmised the name and purpose of the visitor, and calmly, naturally, as if she were performing a commonplace action of her everyday life, she had called Arsene Lupin to her assistance by some preconcerted signal. How Arsene Lupin had come and caused himself to be substituted for the chauffeur were matters of trifling importance. That which affected Sholmes, even to the point of appeasing his fury, was the recollection of that incident whereby an ordinary woman, a sweetheart it is true, mastering her nerves, controlling her features, and subjugating the expression of her eyes, had completely deceived the astute detective, Herlock Sholmes. How difficult to overcome an adversary who is aided by such confederates, and who, by the mere force of his authority, inspires in a woman so much courage and strength. They crossed the Seine and climbed the hill at Saint-Germain. But some 500 meters beyond that town, the automobile slackened its speed. The other automobile advanced, and the two stopped side by side. There was no one else in the neighborhood. "Monsieur Sholmes," said Lupin, "kindly exchange to the other machine. Ours is really a very slow one." "Indeed," said Sholmes calmly, convinced that he had no choice. "Also, permit me to loan you a fur coat, as we will travel quite fast, and the air is cool. And accept a couple of sandwiches, as we cannot tell when we will dine." The four men alighted from the other automobile. One of them approached, and as he raised his goggles, Sholmes recognized in him the gentleman in the frock coat that he had seen at the Hungarian restaurant. Lupin said to him, "You will return this machine to the chauffeur from whom I hired it. He is waiting in the first wine shop to the right as you go up the Rue Legendre. You will give him the balance of the 1,000 francs I promised him. Ah, yes, kindly give your goggles to Monsieur Sholmes." He talked to Mademoiselle Destange for a moment, then took his place at the wheel and started, with Sholmes at his side and one of his men behind him. Lupin had not exaggerated when he said, "We will travel quite fast." From the beginning, he set a breakneck pace. The horizon rushed to meet them, as if attracted by some mysterious force, and disappeared instantly, as though swallowed up in an abyss, into which many other things, such as trees, houses, fields, and forests, were hurled with the tumultuous fury and haste of a torrent as it approached the cataract. Sholmes and Lupin did not exchange a word. Above their heads, the leaves of the poplars made a great noise like the waves of the sea, rhythmically arranged by the regular spacing of the trees, and the town swept by like spectres. Monteau, Vernon, Gaillon. From one hill to the other, from Bon Secours to Canteleu, Rouen, its suburbs, its harbours, its miles of wharves, Rouen seemed like the straggling street of a country village. And this was Duclair, Caudebec, the country of Caux which they skimmed over in their terrific flight, and Lillebon and Quillebeuf. Then, suddenly, they found themselves on the banks of the Seine, at the extremity of a little wharf, beside which lay a staunch sea-going yacht that emitted great volumes of black smoke from its funnel. The automobile stopped. In 2 hours they had travelled over 40 leagues. A man wearing a blue uniform and a gold-laced cap came forward and saluted. Lupin said to him, "Already, Captain? Did you receive my telegram?"
"Yes, I got it."
"Is the Swallow ready?"
"Yes, monsieur."
"Come, Monsieur Sholmes." The Englishman looked around, saw a group of people on a terrace in front of a cafe, hesitated a moment, then, realizing that before he could secure any assistance, he would be seized, carried aboard, and placed in the bottom of the hold, he crossed the gangplank and followed Lupin into the captain's cabin. It was quite a large room, scrupulously clean, and presented a cheerful appearance with its varnished woodwork and polished brass. Lupin closed the door and addressed Sholmes abruptly and almost rudely as he said, "Well, what do you know?" "Everything." "Everything? Come, be precise." His voice contained no longer that polite, if ironical tone which he had affected when speaking to the Englishman. Now his voice had the imperious tone of a master accustomed to command and accustomed to be obeyed, even by a Herlock Sholmes. They measured each other by their looks, enemies now, open and implacable foes. Lupin spoke again, but in a milder tone. "I have grown weary of your pursuit, and do not intend to waste any more time in avoiding the traps you lay for me. I warn you that my treatment of you will depend on your reply. Now, what do you know?" "Everything, monsieur." Arsene Lupin controlled his temper and said in a jerky manner, "I will tell you what you know. You know that under the name of Maxime Bermond I have improved 15 houses that were originally constructed by Monsieur Destange." "Yes."
"Of those 15 houses you have seen 4.
"Yes."
"And you have a list of the other 11.
"Yes."
You made that list at Monsieur Destange's house on that night, no doubt."
"Yes."
And you have an idea that, amongst those 11 houses, there is one that I have kept for the use of myself and my friends, and you have entrusted to Ganimard the task of finding my retreat.
No.
What does that signify?
It signifies that I choose to act alone and do not want his help.
Then I have nothing to fear, since you are in my hands.
You have nothing to fear as long as I remain in your hands.
You mean that you will not remain?
Yes.
Arsene Lupin approached the Englishman, and, placing his hand on the latter's shoulder, said, "Listen, monsieur, I am not in a humour to argue with you, and unfortunately for you, you are not in a position to choose. So, let us finish our business."
Very well.
You are going to give me your word of honour that you will not try to escape from this boat until you arrive in English waters.
I give you my word of honour that I shall escape if I have an opportunity, replied the indomitable Sholmes.
But, sapristi, you know quite well that at a word from me you will be soon rendered helpless. All these men will obey me blindly. At a sign from me they would place you in irons.
Irons can be broken.
And throw you overboard 10 miles from shore.
I can swim.
I hadn't thought of that, said Lupin with a laugh. Excuse me, master, and let us finish. You will agree that I must take the measures necessary to protect myself and my friends.
Certainly, but they will be useless.
And yet you do not wish me to take them.
It is your duty.
Very well, then. Lupin opened the door and called the captain and 2 sailors. The latter seized the Englishman, bound him hand and foot, and tied him to the captain's bunk. That will do, said Lupin. It was only on account of your obstinacy and the unusual gravity of the situation that I ventured to offer you this indignity. The sailors retired. Lupin said to the captain, "Let one of the crew remain here to look after Monsieur Sholmes, and you can give him as much of your own company as possible. Treat him with all due respect and consideration. He is not a prisoner, but a guest. What time have you, Captain?"
5 minutes after 2.
Lupin consulted his watch, then looked at the clock that was attached to the wall of the cabin. 5 minutes past 2 is right. How long will it take you to reach Southampton?
9 hours, easy going.
Make it 11. You must not land there until after the departure of the midnight boat, which reaches Havre at 8 o'clock in the morning. Do you understand, Captain? Let me repeat, as it would be very dangerous for all of us to permit Monsieur to return to France by that boat, you must not reach Southampton before 1 o'clock in the morning.
I understand.
Au revoir, master. Next year, in this world, or in the next.
Until tomorrow, replied Sholmes.
A few minutes later, Sholmes heard the automobile going away, and at the same time the steam puffed violently in the depths of the Swallow. The boat had started for England. About 3 o'clock, the vessel left the mouth of the river and plunged into the open sea. At that moment, Sholmes was lying on the captain's bunk, sound asleep. Next morning, it being the 10th and last day of the duel between Sholmes and Lupin, the Echo de France published this interesting bit of news. Yesterday, a judgment of ejectment was entered in the case of Arsene Lupin against Herlock Sholmes, the English detective. Although signed at noon, the judgment was executed the same day. At 1 o'clock this morning, Sholmes was landed at Southampton. Sherlock seems a little calm, a little too calm. I feel like he's got something up his sleeve. Herlock seems a little calm. It still kind of cracks me up that Watson, or Wilson, has just got a broken arm hanging out in the hospital. Good stuff. If you guys are enjoying this, I would love to hear from you. Please get in touch, anotherworldaudiobooks@gmail.com, or drop a review. I would love to see some more reviews of the podcast coming in. We've got lots of listeners. Just need some interaction here. Let's make this a conversation. Thank you guys so much, and I'm looking forward to next week. This actually isn't a super long book. Let me see here. We've got. That was chapter 5, so we've got 3 more chapters, so it's going to be, we're going to come on to the resolution of this story here pretty quick, so stay tuned, and thank you guys so much for listening and sharing the podcast. We'll talk to you next week.